I suggest we kick this off by maybe you giving a brief introduction to yourself, Anant.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, welcome to our AppZen offices, right? I hope you're enjoying the view here. A little bit about myself. We started the company in 2012. At the end of 2012, before that, I worked for a company called Fujitsu, a Japanese corporation, for about 10 years. I ran their North American applications. I was a vice president there. So this was really the time where we saw a lot of consumer applications which were using NLP coming up. Most common one, which everyone knows of, is Siri. So that was really a moment where I thought that, hey, this could be something which could apply on the enterprise. And given my background in enterprise and e-commerce, all those applications, had to take that decision. Hey, leave the job, enough of golf, and go and do something different. So started the company in 2012. First few months trying to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to build it, and since then it has been a ride, I would say.
Yeah.
I've been really enjoying it.
Very good. Well, thank you. Very interesting story, and our focus of today is your company and also the context of artificial intelligence. And maybe you could also just explain about your company, AppZen. How did that get started, coming from this solid career in Fujitsu, vice president, and then jumping into this startup life in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so the life in Silicon Valley in a corporate environment is very different than what in a startup environment is, right? It's like any corporate environment. It's cushy. It's very traditional. You can expect things to happen in a certain way. Startups, you really have to figure out what we're going to do. Are you on the right path or not? It takes a long time to figure that out. So when we started the company, one thing was very clear. We knew that the data science technologies, as it was called then, were disruptive in nature. It's going to have a profound impact on how enterprises run their business, and we wanted to be a part of that, right?
Yeah.
So we started off building, looking at ways how we could apply these. The key technologies we had developed there was conversational engine, which is today called as a chatbot, but essentially is a way for machines to have not a one-way, command and response, but a command, a response, a conversation, right? So you can engage that very contextually in nature, which is what chatbots essentially do today. So we started with that as a go-forward kind of a way of providing assistance to employees in the company, right? And we looked at which are the areas where we could really help out employees, right? How could we empower every employee in a company to have their own personal assistant in their tasks which require some help. And we kind of looked at a couple of scenarios. Expense reports was one of them. Sales was one of them, right? We built a few kind of pilot applications on those, had them reviewed by a couple of I think industry kind of use cases. Expense was something where we thought that we were getting more traction. Again, the focus was on the employee automation piece of it, right? Something that we could relate to as employees in a corporate environment, right? That, hey, this was a painful thing and we could probably solve that, right? We started off with that, and interestingly, as the technology was being used, and we started looking at some few pilot customers, showing them what we had. They all liked it, what we had. It was a really nice way of talking to a phone, getting you to do certain things, stuff like that, right? As we were talking to more and more people, we really struck upon this particular area in an enterprise, which was not being looked at. So the whole compliance, audit, all these things, right, around expense reports was a wide open area. And interestingly, is one of the controllers of a Fortune 500 company, which who first time when they looked at what we were doing, said that, hey, you guys can understand language, you can understand descriptions, can you help me in this particular area, right? We have a big focus from our board to make sure that we don't have any wastage, any compliance issues, right? And that really got us started on that, saying that, hey, there seems to be an opportunity here, let's dig in more, right? And that's exactly what we did.
All right. Very interesting. So just for our viewers, the switch from this conversational type of assistant within a company to TNC AI enabled decision support, what's kind of the technological link there?
So actually, it's essentially the same technology.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's an application that is different.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people have a technology and then they look for an application. Right?
Yes.
We had a business problem where
Yeah.
we thought that we could apply something that we knew.
Yeah.
Right. And something we were still developing. Right. So we to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of stuff. Right. As I said, our technology, which we have issued a patent on, right, is based on natural language processing, ability to understand language, right? And you see that today a lot in Alexa, Siri, and Google Home and all this kind of stuff, right? That technology understands unstructured data. When we tried to look at what exactly would it need to solve this problem, because this problem we talked about audit and compliance in the back office was being performed by humans, right? And traditionally that has been done. You employ people, they go through either digital information, go through their different transactions and decide what is to be done. Then they have some supporting tools around analytics, business intelligence to help them out, right? But essentially the understanding of the data, understanding of the process itself is done by humans, right? So we said, hey, let's analyze how they're doing it. Right. So as we looked at it, we said that, hey, we have one component of it, which is the NLP, which we can obviously train to look at how expense report are done, right? What are the terms of, as it called, ontology around expenses, right? But then there are a couple of other things that we need for us to actually mimic how humans go about doing this. In terms of, like you said, decision support, right? If I have to go in and read something, if I have to read a piece of paper, an article, a description, a document, right? I need to be able to understand that, right? So though we had some of the components of it, we had to build a whole new platform, which kind of looked at it in a more modular way, so that we could extend it out, right? So NLP was one part of it, which goes across everything, but then we added components around computer vision, essentially for us to semantically again analyze documents. We added components around data augmentation to kind of mimic how we go out and search for information when we don't know something, right? Again, very easy to say that you could go and Google something, but for machines to go out and do that and understand the results is a pretty challenging task, right? So we had to build that, and then finally, a third component which we thought was very useful was the whole concept about being able to understand and learn the whole machine learning concept behind it. To say that, hey, I'm looking at these hundreds of different attributes that I'm getting, what do I get out of it, right? How can I take a decision which will tell me that this is really a problem, or maybe this is something was a mistake done by somebody, right? Being able to make that judgment which a human would normally do.
Right. Very interesting. So today, where do you stand with the company and the product? So what is the proposition to a company today?
Yeah, so it's been a long time since, and obviously we have gone through a whole lot of understanding across multiple Fortune 50 to Fortune 500 companies, and evolution of the product. The product has now understood literally millions of transactions, billions of dollars of worth of transactions, right? And has learned a bunch of stuff, right?
Did you say billions?
Yes, billions of dollars.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yes, so I mean, if you look at the kind of companies we work with, right, these are hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend in T&E, right? And that's why it's a big area to look at. And our customer size is generally in the mid and large enterprise, right? So never customers with employees less than 1,000, always more than that, but it could be 100,000, 200,000 employees. So that's the reason why that scale. So to come back to your question, where it is now, what the proposition is for customers today, it's basically three-pronged.
Okay.
Again, we are here to solve a specific business problem, right, and make an impact to the company in a couple of different ways. The first one that we do is we reduce the need for back office staff to manually do this stuff. What we found was, why this problem existed, and there was never a way around it, companies had devised multiple ways of trying to get some semblance of control and compliance. What they were doing was, they were doing strategies like, hey, let me look at randomly pick up certain expense reports to audit or to review. Let me look at high value ones. Let me identify a few people. And generally we found that only about 2 to 20% of expense reports were actually being looked at.
Okay.
Right?
Did you say two?
Yes.
What was the other?
20%.
Up to 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
So out of every.
So that's companies being very kind of.
Yes. So because the cost
concerned.
of trying to even do 50% audit was very, very expensive.
Yeah.
You would employ hundreds of people. It just was cost prohibitive, right? So what do I do to get to a minimum kind of a thing? Let me just employ certain people. Let me at least say that I have some kind of a control, right? That was one. What we were able to do was take them to 100% audit.
Yeah.
We were able to do that even with lesser number of people than what was required for doing a 20% audit.
Yeah.
Right? That was number one.
Yeah.
Right? The effectivity of machines doing it is far better than what people were doing it. Now the reason is kind of, you have a fixed amount of time which you can do. If you employed a person and said that, hey, do as much as you can, right, to actually find whatever, they can do it. Yeah. But it's just not practical. You cannot spend hours and hours doing things. What we found were the kind of violations that these auditors were finding were very, very minimal. Okay. Right? So there is not really any value in that. We also found, interestingly, that a lot of companies, in order to reduce this cost, were employing people in offshoring this work, or going out in Philippines and India and other Eastern Europe to actually do this work. The cost obviously was lesser there, but the effectivity was even further right? So there was hardly anything being caught in. So we came in and we looked at data which had already been reviewed and audited by the company's staff. Employees had been paid. So our approach has always been, hey, we come to you, we come to a company and say that, let me look at your data, something which is already paid off. And we are able to find far more compliance issues than they even thought was happening. Right?
So do you have to train the application on a specific enterprise, or is it generic to the extent that you can use it across?
Sure. So when we started off, right, when we were the first customer, obviously we had to do that. We are at a stage now where we have a very good understanding of expenses, and the system has been sufficiently trained to find out the anomalies. Right? Now what has happened is, every company, the way the business works, has a certain T&E policy. In order to get them up and running very quickly, we have developed a very templatized approach where we can calibrate the system based on the company's policy. What's allowed, what is allowed. Right? Those rules are generally similar across all corporations, but they are tweaked here and there. Right? So we generally, our time to onboard a company is less than a week. That, hey, we can look at your policy and tell the system, calibrate the system. These are the things that you need to look at. But the system is smart enough now to figure out that, hey, how do you treat certain people? What kind of expenses to look at, right? What kind of misuse patterns are there? What kind of fraud patterns are there? What kind of anti-bribery controls that I need to be looking for, right? So that's how we do it. There is no training required. There's some calibration that is required to be done.
All right, very interesting. So it enables the company to do 100% check audit. So in a way, it expands their audit. But what about quality? So is there a difference in the quality also? Is it possible for a human to do as good a job? It just takes time, or is there also a quality difference?
Sure. So there are two aspects to it. Right? One is a very transactional level aspect. Right? So and one is a behavioral aspect, as we call it, right? What I mean by that is, if you had to give a transaction to somebody, like an expense report, It could be any kind of transaction. Somebody could analyze the hell out of it, right?
Yes.
They could read through it. They could do hundreds of things to research, right? And find out what is wrong with it.
Yes.
Machines can do it in a couple of seconds. A person could take a couple of hours to do it, but they can do it on transaction level. What they miss is a comparison between what the rest of the company is doing, what this person was doing historically, what the behavior is, which comes with experience, but not to a level which machines can remember, right? Because they can literally understand years of data for every employee and figure out where the anomaly is, right? So at a transaction level, yes, an employee, a person can do it, but if you want to look at it holistically to where really you will find the behavioral problems, that's where you just cannot compare with what machines, and they cannot essentially remember all that, that has happened in the past. So coming back to kind of the value proposition, right, is where the effectivity, to answer your question, right? The first one is obviously the 100% audit in real time in a couple of seconds at a much reduced cost than what your human auditors would do. But the second most important thing actually that we do is the effectivity of the audit. And why that is important is because ultimately any kind of misuse, either accidental, intentional, any kind of fraud, leads to loss to the company because your expenses are going up. And that's where we are far more effective, in fact 10 times more effective than what human auditors can. And that's where essentially we have been able to make a huge difference to our customers, right? So if you kind of think about it, right, generally companies have a T&E budget, and a T&E expense is after payroll is the second most highest expense, employee expense that companies have. So literally for corporations it's hundreds of millions of dollars. Knocking even a point off that, right, means that you're going to save $1 million or $2 if you're spending $10-20 million out of it, right? So that's where we have been able to provide the most value. Reducing the cost of your back office is not really the primary goal. So people can be doing far effective things, but reducing the cost of your T&E is the key, because that's where you realize millions of dollars of savings. And the third one is compliance, because what we found out was companies were doing lip service to compliance as a necessity, because again, as I said, the cost of compliance is very high. I'm not talking about compliance just to policies, but there is a very high requirement around compliance to regulatory requirements, right? In the United States, there are things around foreign corrupt practices, anti-bribery, which are supposed to be checked for, and there's just some random things that are checked, right? We were able to bring that regulatory compliance down to a transactional level, so to actually tell you that, hey, this person that this sales guy entertained is actually works for a company that has been blacklisted by the United States government, or this kind of expense that they're doing on entertaining this particular customer, right, or this particular person, tells us that there's probably more to it than a normal entertainment. Maybe they're trying to bribe them or do all those kinds of things, right? So being able to identify those kind of anomalies was something that was never done on T&E side, right? And we were able to bring that in. For some companies are actually far more valuable than being able to reduce them a couple of $1 million.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Now, the process in the company of the audit, I understand that the purpose is not to reduce staff as such. It's but still, so there is staff involved in the corporate, and do you see that changing over time? Because like if we bring this AI discussion up to a kind of very high level, there's this discussion about will the machines eventually take over, and how do you see that in this context here and in your product? Is it so that your product will be so good at some point that no human will need to be involved in the process?
That's a very touchy question, right? So generally when we, what we have seen is the reality is that machines can quickly do non-value added stuff, right? So there is always in any kind of workflow, any kind of task that you're doing, there's certain things where you're using your skill, knowledge, experience, judgmental capabilities, right? Versus there's a lot of tasks that you're doing which are repetitive in nature, which require understanding, but that's at a stage which can be easily done by machines today or robots today, right? what we are seeing is that I'm just going to restrict myself to what expenses and what we are doing. We were finding that auditors and expense processors were spending a lot of time reading through documents, reading receipts, matching them, figuring out what is being bought. All that task has gone away.
Yeah.
Right? They were effective 1 in 50 times. Then out of 50 transactions that they looked at, 1 had a problem.
Okay.
We have taken that out to say that don't look at those 50, look at this 1.
Yeah.
Because yes, I've already found this problem. So the obvious thing is the need for those human auditors has gone down.
Yeah.
But if you look at the other side of it, since we brought this to 100% audit, we are now giving them automated audit. We are now giving them an opportunity to actually evaluate based on their knowledge, their understanding of how the sentiment is in the company, what's going on, what the politics is, and be more judgmental based on that, which is something machines are not good at today, right? So you have obviously reduced the need for it, but then you have empowered them to use that knowledge which they have more effectively, right, in doing those transactions which really require their input, taking away a whole lot of work which was not value added earlier.
Right. And does that then, so the people who will be involved in the company, does the requirements for their training and for their competences then change?
Actually not. So for a good system, right, it needs to be very user friendly.
Yes.
Right? AI is enabler, right?
Okay.
It's not really, because it is AI, it cannot be different, right? So for our point of view, right, the way a system is shown or is showing the results, right, has to be something which an ordinary auditor, accountant, or finance person can really understand. So we have turned it over so that the complexity, the machine learning, all that stays behind the scenes, while the results are what are presented out to an auditor. It could be as simple as, so in our case, right, at a very transactional level, the system will tell the auditor that this is what I found in this particular expense report, right? I found that this particular line number 3, which this person claimed, was already claimed 2 months ago, right? Or we found that he or she paid for an upgrade to first class on this particular flight, right? These are things which are very complex to figure out, but presented in a very layman's term for the auditor. First, from an auditor point of view, it's no different than working with a very standard kind of an application.
That's really interesting, because in some industries you see, and in some contexts you see that the requirements for the people using the systems change.
Yeah.
But it makes totally sense what you're explaining. And now, just a little bit on the technology side. So because AI is such a broad term, and we talked about the story with the NLP, the conversational bots. But what's, I don't know how much you can reveal, but what's really under the hood? Is it a technology you built from the bottom up, or are you building it on some open libraries? What type of tools are you using?
Sure. So as I said, there are 3 key components to it, right? There's a data extraction engine, there's a data augmentation engine, and there's a behavior analysis engine. Right? So these are the kind of 3 pillars of our platform, right? We use a lot of open source too, right? But there's a lot of proprietary applications that we have developed. Open source, especially around things like computer vision, and pretty much every application out there or any uses that open source technologies, right? But just using somebody throwing you an open source technology or any kind of a platform, right, is pretty useless, right? It cannot do anything. It has to be.
And just to put that could be to recognize a signature or to a logo, or what could that be?
It could be everything. So computer vision could be, one of the examples I can give you is for us to understand the spend.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, when you traditionally how a document has been analyzed, they say, let me look at the amount, let me look at the merchant, right? But for us, it's also interesting that to understand what did they spend this money on.
Okay.
So understand the item level information, right? So which means that if I
so is that like optical character recognition, or is it
optical character recognition is it's been around for ages, right? But optical character recognition gives you just the text.
Yeah.
Understanding is what you and me do.
Ah,
right?
yeah. Okay. On top of that.
On top of that.
Yeah.
So building that layer on top
Okay.
of that to say that, hey, I can see that in this there are 2 shots of Grey Goose vodka.
Yeah.
There are 3 IPAs out
Okay.
here.
Yes.
Oh, that means
Okay.
this is a receipt which tells me that there's a lot of alcohol which was consumed out here.
Yes.
How does a machine know that?
Okay.
So the result is that I found there was excessive spending on alcohol.
Yes.
But to arrive at that, it requires a deep understanding
Yes.
of the brands,
Yes.
understanding of
Okay.
the expenses,
Yes.
what the check size is going
Yes.
to be. Is this a majority of that size?
Okay.
So it requires a very thorough interpretation and understanding of the expenses.
Yeah.
So that's like a very easily understood, I think.
Yes.
So underlying OCR might be something generic,
Right.
might be an open source technology,
Yes.
right? But the understanding of that is
Yes.
is very deep.
Okay.
So and this kind of extends out everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. You could do it for logos.
Yes.
You could do it for figuring out where the taxes are, where the VAT taxes are. You could use that for languages.
Yes.
Right. You could use that to say that, hey, I understood different descriptions, but
Yeah.
what do they mean from
Yeah.
the context of what I'm doing right
Yeah.
now? That's where the key technologies are.
Okay.
Right? Being able to build on that is very, very difficult.
Yes. Really interesting, and I think thank you for kind of bringing it down to something that is very clear
Yeah.
with the IPA. I got that. Now, before kind of wrapping this up and getting in just to kind of your company where you are, I'd like just to ask one question. So that's kind of from the employee side. Let's say that I mean, honest mistakes happen in your expense reporting.
Yeah.
And just so that we don't create this kind of worry about artificial intelligence, that you might be kind of doomed and pulled out for things. There's still this human element in it, in the process within the company, to ensure that even honest mistakes are not made a problem.
So you're right. So machines tend to be very black and white, right? It's very binary. Either there's a problem or there's not, right? Now you got to now that's where AI comes in, and being able to have a very sophisticated algorithm which can figure out, is there a difference between at a transactional level that there's an honest mistake versus am I seeing a pattern which will tell me it's a fraud, right?
Okay.
How do you bring that down, something very judgmental, which is what you and me do our research, do something that machines can do, right? So we have spent quite a lot of time trying to find this out, and I think we have come to a point where we can figure out whether this is an honest mistake or not, right?
Okay.
The way we approached it was similar to having how your credit cards are issued, right? When you apply for a credit card, your credit score gets checked, right? A FICO score is not something that is dependent on how much users spend on, but also is based on delinquencies, things like that. So it gives a very good picture that based on your last 4-5 years, this is what your pattern has been. So it's a very good reason to tell me that, hey, here's a good credit history. I'm going to provide you with a credit card. What we did was we turned it around to say that, hey, what we are interested in finding out is the behavior of an employee. I don't really need to know the behavior outside the company. I need to know the behavior as far as the company's expenses are concerned, right? So we built a scoring engine. We call it an index, called ABI, AppZen Behavior Index, which is essentially scoring an employee between a score from 0 to 100 to understand the behavior, right? Although getting to that is pretty complicated, right? And it is a very complex model. So it has to look at hundreds of different traits that an employee leaves on their company expenses. What are those traits? If you try to do it manually, you would look at, hey, how much did he spend versus how much did guys spend? That doesn't give you anything. Right? We have to look at everything from, hey, how many times did this person, claim that they have lost my receipt, right? How important was that? How many times did they upgrade? How many times did their dinners actually happen at midnight or later? It kind of tells us, where those dinners were. How many times did they have it non-travel related expenses on a weekend, right? The model behind that is very, very complex. But what it does, it brings it down to a level, a metric that you can really understand. And what that tells us is that when we start comparing those metrics, it basically gives a score between 0 to 100. 0 being the most compliant kind of an employee, the best score you can have, or closer to 0, 100 being the worst.
Okay.
When we compare employees in a company, we see a very straight histogram, and this is across all the companies that we have seen, right? Where you see that more than 80% of the employees, right, have a score less than 20.
Okay.
Which means that they are most compliant.
Yeah.
And then it starts, going up to all the employees, which are in that 50, 60, 70 range. There's a very small percentage that are out there.
Yeah.
And we have done this across multiple industries, multiple different lines of businesses, multiple different departments. Because with this kind of a model that we have built, we are able to compare compliance of a VP or somebody who's in the management, somebody who's working in sales with his or her peers.
Yeah.
Very important to understand that, right? Because if you try to compare across organizations, it's not going to work, right?
No.
But what we have seen in all the cases is that these small group of people, right, are the ones which are displaying those kind of characteristics. Those kind of characteristics will tell us that they are either intentionally not following the rules or trying to scam the company. So at that level, which is exactly what I was trying to say, that when an auditor looking at a transactional level, right, is not able to take that judgment, right, because there are thousands and thousands of transactions to look at. But a machine has this score which is calculating dynamically to tell us that this particular problem that I'm seeing on this expense report is not a one-off case. This is not a mistake, because I have seen this pattern where everyone else in the past, employees with similar kind of work profile, not having the same kind of thing. So there is a problem out here. And to actually visualize it, because you have to bring it by, like you said, I have to bring it back to a level where an accountant or finance person can understand. If I just give them a score, what does it mean, right? So we have to bring it back to a level to say that, hey, this is what you're finding out here. These are the cases where it actually had this problem, where they did certain things, right? So it took us a lot of time to build that out, but that's how we have tackled it, and it works pretty well.
Impressive. So I mean, this is really interesting. I think the more we get into the details, the more interesting it gets. And you have a lot of data now that really makes you a very interesting and attractive company. What about the future then? Where will you be going over the next year, over the next maybe 3 years as a company?
Sure. So obviously we have some pretty interesting things in the pipeline just for this, right? Always listening to customers. Our customers tend to be multinationals across different countries. We have released quite a lot of stuff around languages, being able to understand multiple languages, multiple kind of documents. We are going into China, getting more information from those countries. So those things are coming along. But essentially, if I look a little bit long term, right, how we have built this is more like a platform, as I said, and there are so many use cases in an enterprise where we can apply it. So we are always looking at these different workflows that are happening, because customers who look at it say that, hey, you're doing this for T&E, can you do it for my payables, my procurement, right? So there are lots of different areas where we can solve these problems, and that's essentially what the roadmap is going to be in the next couple of years.
Great. Really, thank you so much for your time. Very, very inspiring and interesting story. Very impressive company. So I thank you for your time, Anant.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming here. It's a pleasure talking to all.
All right. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.